number of children who are born subsequent to a first abortion with handicaps has increased dramatically. Why? Because when you report the firstborn of any, nature takes its vengeance on these subsequent children. In the Old Testament, the firstborn of every being, animal and man, was dedicated to the Lord. There's a special punishment, Christians would suggest.
Children born with disabilities, according to Virginia state legislator Bob Marshall, are God's punishment for abortion. One of our hardiest, most even-keeled Rachel Maddow Show producers reached Mr. Marshall on the phone today. He said that he stands by his comments and that they are based on chapter 13 of Exodus in the Bible. Quote, "The first offspring of every womb among the Israelites belongs to me, whether man or animal." Representative Marshall also rolls that forward a couple thousand years and told us this, quote, "Christ is referred to as the firstborn, and he was taken to the temple and dedicated." This is not just one guy's medieval opinion on disabilities and kids and Jesus and God's wrath and abortion. Bob Marshall is an elected official. He's a Republican elected official in Virginia. And this is the argument that he's using as an elected official to call on Virginia's Republican governor, Bob McDonnell, to cut off any state support for Planned Parenthood. Governor McDonnell is on record as promising to veto any funding for Planned Parenthood, which says it got about $35,000 from the state last year, mostly in the form of Medicaid reimbursements. We called Governor McDonnell's office today to get his response to the comments of Representative Bob Marshall. The governor's office did not respond to our requests for comment. Even as Bob McDonnell is being promoted as a promising new face for the Republican Party, Virginia's politics have taken an immediate, very hard right turn under the new governor. Earlier this month, Governor McDonnell revoked an existing order in the state that banned discrimination against state workers. Get this. Governor McDonnell rescinded the old order and replaced it with a new one. And the new one removes sexual orientation from the lists of reasons you can't be discriminated against if you work for the state of Virginia. So 9 days after Republicans tapped Governor Bob McDonnell to give the Republican Party's response to President Obama's first State of the Union, the governor declared by executive order that it is legal in the Commonwealth of Virginia for anyone who works for the state to be fired only because they're gay. Any state agency can put up help wanted ads now that say gays need not apply. Thanks to Bob McDonnell's overt action, his overt order in this case, you can be asked what your sexual orientation is in a job interview in Virginia, and your answer can legally be the reason you don't get the job. If you currently work for the state of Virginia in any capacity, it is now legal for your supervisor to ask you what your sexual orientation is, or even to investigate your suspected sexual orientation, and you can be fired from your job with the state for the simple fact that you are gay. That's legal in Virginia now. Didn't used to be. Bob McDonnell just went out of his way to affirmatively change the law by executive order to make that the new law in his state. Republican rising star governance, circa 2010. Joining us now is Melissa Harris-Lacewell, an MSNBC contributor and professor of politics and African American studies at Princeton. Melissa, thanks very much for coming on the show.
Yeah, I'm sorry it has to be under these circumstances. Sometimes you bring me on just because I'm like the one person who won't scream, but I'm feeling a little bit like I want to scream right now.
Am I right in remembering that you grew up in Virginia?
That's right. I grew up in Virginia, and I remember that one of my favorite moments of, November 2008 election night was Virginia going blue. And so this is a pretty stunning and an absolute reversal. And the fact that it's not just around issues of fiscal governance or statecraft, but right at the heart in both cases of the question of citizenship, of rights, particularly for marginal classes of people, is a pretty frightening indicator of what will happen, if, in fact, for example, in the 2010 midterm elections, we lose the House.
Can you contextualize the first guy that we talked about in the introduction here, Representative Bob Marshall? He's arguing, incredibly, that children with disabilities are God's punishment. I expected that when we reached him today by phone that he would say, I was taken out of context, I didn't mean it in this. He's not backing off from it at all. Does somebody holding a position like that get exiled from the Virginia Republican Party? Does it go over cool with everybody? What happens to somebody who voices opinions like this in Virginia politics?
Well, I'll tell you, what I'd like to do is go chapter and verse with Bob Marshall. You know, part of what I do, of course, is that I'm a seminary student and I have an honorary doctorate in seminary studies. And I'd like to talk to him about what the Bible says about dedicating one's first fruit. And the fact that, you know, the notion of dedication often had to do with killing the firstborn. And in fact, that Jesus, who he points to, who was dedicated in the temple, was, of course, also offered up as a blood sacrifice. So he's got a little bit of theological explaining to do on the basic understanding of biblical text. But I'm going to try not to go there and instead just suggest, you know, that first of all, what Planned Parenthood is the primary health care provider for millions of American women. And what's happened at this moment, you know, from my perspective, is that the federal government has set out a sort of behavioral practice over the past year that says, you know what, it's okay to go after women's reproductive health. We're not going to count that under health care. It's been a huge part of sort of what's gone on, particularly with blue dog Democrats in the House and Senate. And so we've got to take a stand and say, listen, issues of pregnancy termination are issues of women's health. Planned Parenthood provides preventive care, it provides termination services, but it also provides basic primary health care for millions of American women, particularly in rural areas in places like Virginia.
I wonder, actually, thinking about that, when I was talking with Ezra Klein earlier in the show about what's happening next with health policy, I was thinking about whether or not hearing an attack on reproductive rights put in essentially theocratic terms, and as you put it, maybe inept theocratic terms, by this state representative in Virginia might actually be a clarion call for people to wake up and stop sort of being so I don't know, so mushy in terms of defense of reproductive rights right now.
Well, look, and it's the same thing relative to this issue of removing the rights of around sexual orientation for state worker protection in Virginia. Similarly, I mean, everything you just described about what's now possible to happen to state workers in Virginia is also true under don't ask, don't tell laws. You know, what we've done is we've said, look, as Democrats, we are not going to take a hard stand for the protection of and the extension of first-class citizenship around sexual orientation. And not just sexual orientation. In 39 states in this country, it is legal to discriminate in both housing and employment around gender expression. So transgendered individuals have particularly difficult times in holding employment opportunities for which they're qualified, for finding housing that they can afford. We've got to set a new tone, and we've got to say that this terms, theologically or politically, is completely unacceptable. We need one standard of citizenship.
Melissa Harris-Lacewell, Princeton professor, MSNBC contributor, of which we are very proud, Nation columnist. Thanks for coming on the show, Melissa. Appreciate it.
Thanks.